Hello, and welcome back to the Reconciliation Project podcast, where we are formed by faith and informed by science. I'm Hunter.
I'm Sam.
And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at some compromise positions that involve time, specifically where people try to reconcile the idea of millions or billions of years with the Genesis 1 account.
Yeah, and so it's important that we clarify that when we say compromise, we're referring to a difference in these theories and what the Bible says, obviously. Most of them are from people who want both and are willing to lessen the authority of the Bible and science to get both. And it's important to note that you're lessening the authority of both. You're both saying, hey, yeah, no, Genesis really isn't that important, and or we think it's actually wrong. But you're also willing to overlook some of the science that shows that young Earth is a possibility.
Yeah, and some of the positions we can see where they really stretch what science can actually do and what science actually shows.
Either way, we're going to be covering kind of the big three, those being ideal time theory, gap theory, and then day-age theory. So you actually have a little bit for us on ideal time theory, so take it away.
Yeah, and this is one that I was actually more recently introduced to, that I didn't know it was that popular of an idea for people to think. Essentially, people who hold to ideal time theory believe that the Earth is in reality young, as a young Earth creationist would say, between 6 and 10,000 years old. But they say it was made to look old. They say that God created everything to look old, to appear old. And people who hold to this, they use evidence such as the original animals and the original life when they were created. Because you can imagine when God created life originally, he would have made them in their full adult forms. I mean, he even gives the command to multiply
and be fruitful.
Which indicates that they are at least of age of reproduction, which means they would have to be in those early adult years.
Yeah, so based on Genesis 1:28, that does make sense.
Right. So this tells us the life would have to be at least some sort of a young adult stage. And they use this to say, well, couldn't God have just created everything to look old as he did with those as they were in their adult forms, even though they were only a couple minutes old when God first said, let there be whatever. And the root of this idea is that both the literal creation account, which from the young Earth view, and the science suggesting that an old Earth are both accurate. So the point is that while the Bible shows that the Earth is young, the science that says the Earth is old isn't necessarily wrong, because God just made it to look that way or seem that way.
Yeah, which if you're going to make that claim, okay, but that's the same idea as a 5-year-old walking into a bar and saying, hey, serve me, I want alcohol. And obviously the bartender's going to say no because they look like 5. But then that 5-year-old saying, oh no, I'm actually 21 years old, I just have a baby face. So like that's kind of the concept we're talking about here.
Yeah, it really doesn't make sense. And honestly, this is in a way, in my opinion, kind of a cop-out to just say, well, God could have just made everything look old, which he could have, but that's kind of outside of God's character, because we've mentioned in the past that he is not an author of confusion. I don't think he would intentionally trick us in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of a weird way to stay squarely in the middle and not pick a side. So
yeah, as we talked about last episode with the neutral ground, this position really, you're sitting on the fence and you're not picking either, and you're just compromising both sides. Like the science is very clear, the Bible is very clear. There's no need to say, well, the science says the Earth is old, and it's correct, but the Bible shows the Earth is young and it's correct. Like
it doesn't make sense.
You're not picking a side. And again, we're not trying to pick sides, but this is the thing, you have to decide what you believe. You can't be.
You can't hold to both. You can't hold to mutually exclusive truths. But moving forward, another one that we mentioned as part of the big three is the gap theory, which is the idea that there is a big time jump somewhere between either Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, or between Genesis 1:2 and 1:3. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. That's Genesis 1:1 through 1:3. So somewhere in those 3 verses, proponents of the gap theory hold to there being a large span of time that's fit in between those verses.
Yeah, and the point of this one is to essentially take the huge amounts of time that science says is there and put it into this point where it's kind of a gray area for some people. There's many interpretations of what Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 mean. And because of that, they will hold to a literal creation week, but will put a lot of time in those first 2 verses or first 3 verses to account for what science shows.
Yeah. And there are multiple types, right?
Yes, there's a couple. There's the first one called the active gap theory, which simply proposes that Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 refer to an original creation that God made and that lasted for millions of years. And God created this creation, we could think perfectly, but it fell, similarly to what we read in the Bible. But this creation fell and became corrupted. And as a result, God destroyed it due to that sin, leaving that formless earth present for the beginning of Genesis 1:3. And we can read in Genesis 1:2 where it does say the earth was formless. And proponents of this active gap idea say that that creation that was originally there got destroyed and essentially reset to that formless form.
Yeah. But that said, there are some pretty important scriptural issues and contradictions. So, for example, if the earth was destroyed because of this sin that had occurred in the previous creation, quote unquote, we hear in Revelation and end times that God is capable of full destruction of the earth. Based on biblical principles, we know that the end of the world will essentially be fire and flood, and the ocean will pass away, and the sky will pass away, and the earth will pass away, and it'll all just be gone. So if you're going to hold to that in Revelation or in some of the Gospels even, to potentially destroy the sin of this world, why is that not used to destroy the old creation, quote unquote? And if that were to be the case, we probably wouldn't see anything geological which would allow some of the extra measurable time from this first Earth that would potentially lead to the idea of millions or billions of years. But on top of that, there's also grammatical issues that occur if you're looking at those verses and imply those ideas.
Yeah, and there are Hebrew scholars and people who actually hold to the earth being old who say the active gap theory just makes no sense, because if you look at the original Hebrew, the words in Genesis 1:2 clearly translate and mean the earth was formless and empty. It does not in any way indicate or mean the earth became formless and empty, which is something you would see if this active gap idea were accurate. And something else someone might try to argue is that, well, God didn't entirely destroy the earth with the flood, so couldn't he have done that originally? But for starters, as you mentioned, if he's destroying everything because of sin, we see what he will do in Revelation to this earth. He would have done that in that case before as well, because in the active gap idea, that original creation was completely destroyed.
Absolutely. And even if you were going to make the argument that, okay, well, Noah's flood wasn't that bad, you could also make the argument that Noah's flood may not have been as bad as end times destruction because of Noah and his family. God singled out Noah and his family because they were righteous and he wanted them to be the ones to start over. However, if you're going to use that as an example of, oh yeah, God's destruction really isn't that bad, you're kind of working with a false theory there.
Yeah. God was very clear, and he wanted to spare Noah's family because of his righteousness.
Yeah.
And he decided to keep life on earth going through the ark.
Exactly. Whereas in active gap, you're seeing a complete destruction of all life, all form, any being whatsoever.
Yes, essentially like a reset button. There's also the passive gap theory, and there's two versions of that as well. There's the passive gap A idea, which suggests that Genesis 1:1 and 2 and Genesis 1:3 are separated by a significant amount of time, and that God creates the universe and the earth in those first two verses. So the universe and the earth itself are old, but all of life itself on earth is young. So the basic idea here is that the earth and the universe are both old, because God created the earth and the universe in those first two verses. But the time in between 1:2 and 1:3 is significant, which is where we would get millions and billions of years.
In geologic activity, potentially.
Right. However, they will also say all the life on earth is young. So much more like a 6,000 to 10,000 year time frame.
Yeah, but that also comes with some other issues, especially if you're going to say, okay, everything from Genesis 1:3 on is all the young earth stuff, quote unquote. All of that is young, or 6,000 to 10,000 years old. That describes some aspects of our universe that aren't life related. Yes, it covers plants, it covers animals, it covers humans, but that's 2 days work, right? Everything else there is light, heavens being formed, land and sea being formed, stars being formed. So if you're going to make the argument that, oh, well, everything from day 1 to 7 is young, but the Genesis 1:1 to 1:2 is much, much, much older, there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, and this kind of brings up the starlight problem that we talked about a few episodes ago, where there are stars that are billions of light years away, And we talked about if that's true, then there has to be billions of years of time somewhere, according to the old Earth view. So how do you reconcile that with saying, well, everything post verse 1:3 is young?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
When God clearly made the stars in day 4,
Mm-hmm.
there's a little bit of, as you said, a disconnect there, and there's really a big issue that you have to reconcile.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, there's also the passive gap B idea, which has the same idea as passive A, but the first 2 verses refer only to the earth itself rather than the entire universe. And according to this idea, Genesis does not discuss the creation of the universe. So this allows for the universe being eternal or the universe being created at some point way before.
Which I think we can acknowledge based on science by itself, even if you were to completely discount the Bible, which, of course, based on our last episode, we know we shouldn't do. But if you were just to rely on the science bit, science has, again, not necessarily proven, but shown multiple times over that the universe had to have a beginning.
Right. The idea of the universe being eternal was widely accepted originally early on in cosmological studies, but soon it became very clear to scientists that as much as they didn't like it, the universe had a beginning.
Yeah.
And as a result, eternal universe theory became widely discredited by the scientific community. And the Bible also clearly indicates there being a beginning of some sort.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's also possible that this idea would allow for day 4 to be the creation of the universe, but I don't think that makes it any sort of sense because you still have the starlight problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this would result in the universe being younger than the earth. And both a biblical worldview and a just purely scientific naturalistic worldview suggests otherwise, that the universe is older.
Yeah.
Regarding the gap theory as a whole, there are some Christians, particularly Seventh-day Adventists, that will argue that there must have been some time between the very beginning and the rest of creation itself to allow for the fall of Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Satan was formerly Lucifer, and he was one of the best angels. God kind of set him over the other angels.
He was in God's inner circle, so to speak.
Yeah, but he became very prideful. That's the first sin right there, is pride. And he wanted to essentially be God and be over God. And he wanted the other angels to worship him. And he actually did get some angels to follow him.
Which we know based on some scripture and also some other texts that are not included in the Bible that then caused a angelic war between 2/3 of God's remaining angels that still sided with him and Lucifer's angels, the 1/3 that did side with him. And we know that Lucifer and those angels were cast down to earth, to Sheol, depending on the translation that you look at.
And they argue that this event, this war that Satan and his angels ultimately lost, I guess I should say Lucifer at this point, that Lucifer and his angels ultimately lost, they get kicked out of heaven. Mm-hmm. And they will argue that this had to have taken longer than a 24-hour day. Mm-hmm. Or less than a 24-hour day. Even they reference Revelation where it says there's long conflict. Mm-hmm. And they even refer to the 1,000-year conflict there. And they will refer to several Bible passages that indicate that creation occurred after the creation of angels and after Lucifer being cast down to the earth from heaven. Mm-hmm. It's very common for them to add Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 12 to this discussion, which they will argue that these passages talk about the fall of Lucifer and how he was cast down to earth.
Mm-hmm. But the problem with that is that those prophets are actually using that imagery to describe events in a way that Israel would understand and are referring more to the fall of the king of Tyre and of Babylon.
Right. And also you can read various versions, because I've actually done some study into this because I just found it interesting. I've looked at several versions of the Bible, and as you look, you can see the different words that are used for where Satan got cast to. I saw earth being used as a term, and the King James Bible itself uses pit and hell. Mm-hmm. Rather than earth. So it's very likely that Lucifer was not kicked to earth, but instead was kicked to hell, which we know God created hell specifically for Lucifer and his demons. Mm-hmm. It wasn't for us originally. It was for Satan and his angels after they rebelled.
Absolutely.
So the whole point of bringing this up is, well, yes, I think they make a reasonable argument in favor of the gap theory with this. I don't think it stands with, when you look at the original text, when you look at other parts of Scripture, and when you really take into account what the context of those Scriptures was.
Mm-hmm. There's an additional disconnect there that you have to reconcile.
And the last theory that we're going to really dig into today is the day-age theory, which tries to fit the extra time by suggesting that the 6 days of creation were not literal 24-hour days as we know them. Mm-hmm. And this is a component of what is called progressive creationism, which we will cover in more detail in a later episode. The day-age theory is really calling into question what the Hebrew word yom means in this context.
The Hebrew word yom is used for day, and there are many people who are proponents of this theory that make the argument that says that yom really means period of time, times, or ages. We see this used particularly in Genesis 1:5, 1:8, 1:13, 1:19, 123 and 131. This is mainly where it says there was evening and there was morning, the number day, right? First day, second day, third day, all the way down to seventh day. So really, again, the argument is over yom. What does yom mean?
Right, and proponents of day-age theory will refer to the fact that there are 4 definitions for the word yom in the Bible. And I actually have a little bit of an excerpt to kind of go into this idea a little more. And it says, and I quote, "Day-age creationists believe God miraculously transformed the earth and created all its life within 6 literal days. That is 6 long but finite time periods. The Hebrew word yom, translated day, has 4 distinct definitions, all of which are quote-unquote literal in the sense that they fall within the strict, accurate meaning of the word. Definition 1, part of the daylight hours. We see that in the resurrection of Jesus. We read very clearly that he was in the grave for 3 days. Well, if you count that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's really just 2 days. But because he was in the grave for Friday, all of Saturday and part of Sunday, they consider that 3 days, despite it really just being 2 days in total time. Definition 2 is all of the daylight hours.
Yeah, so that would be from somewhere between 5 and 6 a.m. to somewhere between 7 and 8 p.m.
Yeah.
Depending on seasonal variation.
Definition 3 is 1 rotation period of the earth, which we can equate to
a literal 24 hours.
Roughly 24 hours. 23 point some odd, but roughly 24 hours. And then the 4th definition is a long but finite time period. In the biblical Hebrew, we see that there is no word other than yom that indicates a long but finite time period. And we see references to where yom is used in this context for it being a longer than just a single day. We see this when the day of the Lord is mentioned, which we know is a longer period of time than just a single 24-hour day. We know that we see this mentioned in Revelation that actually could refer to the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Or it could refer to something else that might take a week or whatever. There's some different views based on your eschatology. But overall, people agree that the day of the Lord is much longer than just a single day. And people will refer to this and other uses of the word yom in the Bible where it clearly refers to longer than a single day.
One of the other possibilities for yom in that context of a finite but long period of time is also referring to day in the sense of, oh, back in my day or back in the day, referring to a time that was long ago but was not necessarily today.
Right. And some will also argue that 2 Peter 3:8, which says that for God a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day. They'll refer to this verse and say that it allows for the days of creation to be long periods of time. However, this verse is really irrelevant to the discussion of how long a day is in Genesis 1. This verse is discussing the fact that God is outside of time. And even if it did allow for the days to be longer, it would only result in 6,000 years of time in Genesis 1, which gets us nowhere near the millions of years that day-age proponents hold to.
And that's assuming that you're holding to the idea that, oh, 1 day is 1,000 years.
Right.
You then have 6 days that are supposedly 1,000 years, which gets you to the 6,000.
Right. And you also have to consider, going by this view, you also have to consider the verse kind of contradicts what you're thinking at the end where it says 1,000 years is like a day. So this verse really doesn't mean anything to tell you, hey, okay, a day is 1,000 years. Well, it says 1,000 years is a day. So it cancels out, essentially. And typically when we do Bible studies, we look at the context. The context of this verse refers to, as we just mentioned, the day of the Lord and how people at this time were asking when it would happen, because in the time that Peter was writing this letter, it had been many years since Jesus had ascended to heaven. And they knew he had said, hey, I'm coming back, right? Well, where is he?
Yeah.
A lot of people thought he was going to come around 80, 70.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he didn't. And the people were asking, well, when is this going to happen? But Peter uses this verse to show how God is outside of time. And most importantly, that his timing is different than our own timing. And that he is patient rather than slow. And as I had just mentioned, the day of the Lord is one of the examples of the use of yom being a longer period of time. However, the biblical context about the day of the Lord indicates that the day of the Lord is a long time period. This context that would indicate that is not seen in Genesis 1.
Absolutely.
And also want to discuss a little bit when we talk about taking the words literally. To take a word literally, going back to the excerpt that I was reading from, I want to finish that out. And it says, and I quote, "Here the term literal is used loosely to include meanings beyond the normal sense of the word day. It's undeniable that many scholars, like the creator of the day-age theory, maintain that the sense of a long but finite time period falls in the semantic range of what yom means. But it's not a literal denotation according to the standard definition of literal, which means taking words in their usual, most basic sense." And to look at that, I really want to look at what Merriam-Webster Dictionary says about the word day. And it has 7 definitions for day. I'm going to read those out now. The first one is the time of light between one night and the next. Definition 2 is an astronomical definition, the period of rotation of a planet, such as the Earth, or moon on its axis. Definition 3 is the mean solar day of 24 hours beginning at midnight. Definition 4 is a specified day or date. 5, a specified time or period. 6, the conflict or contention of the day. 7, the time established by usage or law for work, school, or business. And so we can see that several of these definitions will fit into that part of the daylight hours definition for Yom. With the work day, we see the work day is 8 hours. The school day is about 6 to 7 hours here in the United States. We can see that definition of a long but finite time period here in definition 5, where it says specified time period. And the example it gives is in grandfather's day or in the old days, which clearly refers to a long period of time. However, the rest of them are very specific for a 24-hour day. Time of light between one night and next, daytime. Period of a rotation of a planet, day. That defines what a day is in astronomy. The mean solar day of 24 hours, beginning at midnight.
And ending at midnight.
Right. A specified day or date. And the example they give is their wedding day or the day of their birth. And the talking about the conflict or contention of the day, the example they give is played hard and won the day, still referring to a specific day. So 6 out of 7 of these definitions talk about part or all of a 24-hour daylight day. So, and the point of me going through the dictionary definitions there is to show if we take the word day literally, it doesn't indicate a long but finite time period, but indicates a short 24-hour time or a part of the time. I mean, if you go ask a 5-year-old, what is a day? If they can tell you, they're not going to say a long but finite time period.
The time the sun is up, or something like that.
They'll say something like that, or they might say, well, that's the time I'm at school. Or something like that. They're not going to say, oh, it's a long period of time. They're going to tell you something that's very basic and to the point.
Absolutely.
Which is what the word literal means. While proponents of day-age theory may argue, well, yeah, we're still taking Genesis literally. You're really stretching the definition of literally.
But moving forward, there are other types of compromised views. We're not going to cover these in specific detail. However, if anybody does want to cover them in specific detail, we would love to hear from you. You can email us. Our email should be in the description, yes. And we can potentially cover these in more detail. But Hunter, you have some information on some of these other types.
Yeah, and I'm just going to go through them really quickly. Like you said, we don't have time to go through all of these because they're all interesting ideas and some of them kind of overlap with each other. But some of the general principles are the same. We're trying to get time into the Bible somehow. There's the dual perspective theory, which essentially proposes that while on Earth, yes, it was six 24-hour days, but outside of there, it was longer.
Okay.
So 2 perspectives there. The analogical days position, and it was kind of, in a way, to give an analogy, and it's analogical, that it talked about a work week, because man works on it was 6 out of 7 days, biblically. But in reality, it was longer. So the idea is that the 6 days were simply just to give a point, an analogy for what a work week would be, rather than actual time. And then there's historical creationism, which is similar to the gap theory, which proposes that there were 2 great acts of creation recorded in Genesis 1, which they say verse 1 was a first creation, and the rest of the chapter is a second. And the 6 days of Genesis is God preparing a local promised land for mankind. There is the fiat theory. We're not talking about cars with this one. The fiat theory is simply discussing that God gave his creation commands, or fiats. When he said, let there be light, that was his creation commands, or his fiat. And he did that in 6 days, but the creation itself took much more time. There's the revelatory day theory, which suggests that God revealed his creation in 6 days, but the actual forming of the creation took much longer. There's the cosmic temple inauguration theory, which is weird, in my opinion, suggests that God used the text in Genesis to describe something not in this world, that the 6 days were for something else rather than creation itself. And finally, there's the framework hypothesis, which suggests that God gave the framework for creation in 6 days, but the full creation took much longer to occur. So, like I said, we can talk more about those later on if anyone listening would be interested in that, or you're welcome to look into that yourself. But the overall point for all of these is to get the deep time into the 6 days of creation. And it's to reconcile where someone sees science shows, yeah, the earth is old. And rather than question the science, which I think scientists would tell you, hey, question it. I think the whole point of science is to question. I mean, you consider peer review. It's a brutal process of people questioning your work. Science is all about asking questions. So if you want to, you see the science that says the earth's old, well, you can question it and dig deeper. And I would argue, I think you would argue as well, that the science suggests the earth is young.
Absolutely.
Or you can try to reconcile what the Bible says, where there's might be some gray areas or little loose terms here and there, to try to mesh the deep time into the Bible.
Which is what all of these theories are attempting to do.
Yes. And they're all compromise positions in my view. They're all ways to compromise what the Bible says.
Absolutely.
And again, I want to reiterate what I said before. If you hold to the earth being old, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The Bible doesn't say you have to, but you have to be prepared to deal with the implications that holding to the old earth view comes with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, we're going to go ahead and call it a day on this episode. Next time, we're going to be discussing how did things start. So we're going to dive into a little bit more information on the idea of an eternal universe versus the Big Bang and or how the universe may have started, and then where God comes into that. We hope that you will join us for that.